I am Keguro Macharia. I write from and think from Nairobi. Um, I wrote a book. It was published. It's called Portage. It won an award. I don't know what that says about me, but it's there. Um, Many years ago, after I just finished my PhD, I came to Nairobi in the gap between starting my employment and Dr. Joyce Nyairo, the Dr. Joyce Nyairo, took me for lunch at the Fairview. I'm not sure if Joyce remembers this.
I do.
Yeah. And it was the highlight of my trip to Kenya at that point, because here was Dr. Joyce Nyairo sitting down and listening and asking me questions and being curious. And the thing is, when you finished your PhD, you really just imagine that it was all useless and it was the most boring thing possible. And Dr. Joyce Nyairo made me feel like an intellectual and invited me after that to present at a conference, my first conference as an intellectual in Kenya. And so if I have any credentials whatsoever as an intellectual in Kenya, if I have any sense of myself as an intellectual in Kenya, I owe it all to Dr. Joyce Nyairo. So thank you, Joyce. That is my introduction.
Okay.
Thank you. Eddie, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'll go the same way Keguro has gone, by way of introducing the other participants, the true gossipers. It is very funny, I've never met Dr. Nyairo. We've met virtually. We've only been meeting online and via email. For Keguro, it was the same thing. We also met online for the first time. And I was doing my PhD at VETS. And then I'd requested Professor Pumla, who is in the room, I think. I've just seen her comment right now. So I'd asked her to present in the departmental seminars. Then she said, if you bring Keguro, I will present. Then that's how we met with Keguro for the first time in South Africa. Now we are meeting with Joyce, but also virtually, but I'm definitely sure we will meet. My name is Eddie Ombagi. I have a PhD, African literature from West University. And I'm done. Joyce.
So I think everybody has already introduced it. There's nothing more to say except that I love these wonderful people, all of them, because they do the kind of writing that keeps me alive. Sometimes I describe myself as a reluctant academic because I run away from preaching to the choir to try and write for the people that all this is about. And in the time that I've been doing that, it's been a lot of fun, but I keep getting dragged back into events like this that threaten to be academic. And I panic when things become academic because I just want to talk about ordinary things. As you can all see, Keguro and I are great gossips because he's sitting in the garden ready to whisper and I'm sitting in the kitchen ready to make tea as we talk. So the setting is perfect for gossip.
Yeah.
I hear that.
Sorry, that's me.
Great.
Oops,
That you could play it. So I'll call you to play it. Thank you. Because I could hear it. Yeah, that's great.
All right.
Okay. So those were the introductions.
Sure.
You can tell it's something different coming. Are we going to play the music now?
No, let Keguro first tell us what gossip is about and then, you know.
Oh, Eddie was supposed to tell us something.
So can I leave the screen? Would that be okay? I'm here, but I'm going to leave the screen now.
Okay. Eddie.
Nice. Because I don't want to speak too much because I'm not one of you people. I want to leave the two of you to have a nice conversation while I'm also in the background. I just want to give a small, not really an introduction, but a motivation behind this particular seminar for now, right? And it comes from Twitter, and Dr. Joyce and Dr. Keguro are active Twitter users. And there are two terms that we normally especially within the Kenyan Twitter space, but also South African mostly. There are two terms that we normally alternate. One of them is when people say that, give me the tea, right? Give me the tea. And then the second one is bring the receipts, right? So what do those two mean in terms of not only just the production of gossip, but really its circulation, right? So for example, the word receipt here could imply evidence, but not just really evidence, but really juicy evidence, like the hot stuff. And even tea, when you talk about tea, and for the Kenyans in the house, you know about the tea master. There's a famous tea master on Instagram. So now for tea, for me, the way I understand the relevance of tea is how tea brings people together. There's an intimacy around tea that brings people together to come and just talk, to come and just gossip, to come and conversate, etc., etc. So for me now, that was the intention for me to think about gossip within those two terms: bring the tea, or give me the tea, and bring the receipts. Then I invited Dr. Nyairo, I invited Dr. Keguro. On Twitter one morning, I think it was 7 a.m. in the morning, I quoted both of them. Then Keguro said, so long as Nyairo agrees, then I'll do it. And here we are right now. So from here, I think I'll let the two of you to lead us in gossip. Yeah. Now we can play the song now.
Before we play the song, I think it's, Keguro, is it okay? I think it's important to do. We're running away from academia, but let's just go back for a minute and sort of ask, why would gossip matter? You know, how does gossip matter? And I think it's important for me to say that when I think about a topic like this, why does gossip lend itself so easily to literary and cultural studies, if I can put the question that way? And I think that first and foremost, gossip is a genre of storytelling. It is in and of itself literary, okay? And the other thing to think about, I think, is that, you know, disciplines like law, like engineering, they concern themselves with fact, with evidence, with the measurement of truth in a very sort of singular, linear way. But I think what happens here, so for example, in law, gossip is inadmissible as evidence. It's hearsay, it's inadmissible. But we're saying, or I'm saying, that in cultural studies, in literary studies, gossip matters because we're concerned with probability. We're concerned with the work of the imagination. And Keguro is going to tell us a lot more about this work of the imagination, I'm sure. But this is why gossip matters in literary and cultural studies. It's about probability. It's about imagination. It's about those realms that make life livable, if I can say it that way. And to gossip is to speculate. And to speculate is to open up ways of thinking. I'm quoting Keguro loosely here about the work of speculation, the pathways of possibility. And finally, let me say that literary and cultural studies are attuned to gossip because it always works as a reading of character and situation. Yeah? How do we understand what kind of person would do a certain thing, or what is the motivation behind particular actions, or how did a particular context, you know, economic, political, whatever, lead to certain actions? Gossip is always about character and situation. And this fundamentally is what literary studies are about. I'll come back to use an actual story to illustrate all of this. But I first of all want to provoke Keguro about imagination, and I want to provoke Keguro about intimacies. Please, 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 why is gossip intimate, Keguro?
All right, thank you. Oh my God. Okay, how do I follow that? Dr. Nyairo, please. And I failed my exams. I made notes though, so I hope some of these touch. I hope some of these touch on what you said. So I sort of have a list of 7 things because I like numbers and I like the number 7. And I could have done either 3 or 5, but I thought let's do 7. Okay. So some of these are going to build on some of what you've said, and some of them I think might take us in other directions. And then let me also just thank my crew who are here now, and Alea and all the rest, and a lot of people on Twitter who very, very generously offered definitions and suggestions and recommendations about what gossip is and what gossip does. You know, we often say jokingly Twitter University, but honestly, so much of my thinking is shaped by what he said. And thank you all for your generosity. And I hope we can continue the conversation about what gossip is and does on Twitter. And otherwise, please don't gossip about me. Otherwise, there's nothing interesting to say. So, you know, okay. So number one, gossip is an invitation. Right? We never gossip alone. We are always inviting people to be gossiping with us. So there is the person who has the gossip, there's the person who is listening, there's the person or the people who are the subject. So gossip is always an invitation. And I love when Joyce said, I'm in the kitchen, you're sitting outside. So there's spaces where gossip can happen. Come to my kitchen. Let us gossip, let us talk. Two, gossip works at different temporalities. There's the fresh gossip, hot off, you know, you just saw someone leaving your neighbor's house and that person is not the person you had seen your neighbor with, then you know your neighbor to be with. So you're like, Mama so-and-so, who is that new person, right? So there's the fresh gossip. And I was talking to someone this weekend and they said, you know, it's very disappointing when you're not the first person to receive the fresh gossip, when you're like the second person. It's very disappointing. But then gossip also has an afterlife. For those of us who have been attending way too many funerals, funerals are places where old gossip comes up. You know, you stand somewhere and you're sort of like, and who is that one? I don't know them. That one, do you remember in 1985, right? So gossip is not only fresh, gossip also has an afterlife, right? And can always come back, not with the same force, but it can always come back. Still on temporality, there is nothing more disappointing than trying to pass on gossip to someone who already has it. You know, you start trying to tell someone a juicy story. Did you hear that John, yesterday? You mean when John? And they cut you off, and it's not in a bad way, but you're like, I had this sweet thing to give you, but you already know it, and sometimes it can continue, but you know, you like the juice to give the juice. You don't want it to be interrupted. So gossip is fresh. And then I was thinking, just because Dr. Nyairo brought up literary studies and cultural studies, and so I want to think a little bit just about words, right? Well, there are two things. One, there is gossip, which refers to the person, right? The gossip, the one who comes. And the gossip is a particular kind of figure, right? So people can have gossip, but there's someone who is known as the gossip. You know, when they come to your house or they come to your situation, you're like, this is the one who, you know, and if you're having a party or a function, which we will have in these post-corona times, we hope, you want to invite that person because they will just sweeten everything, you know, but you don't want to tell them your stories before they come because you know that you'll become the subject, right? So there's the gossip, there's the person. And then there's gossip, which is just the noun, gossip, the thing that is passed around, right? Which shifts, which changes, which does. And then there's also gossip, which is just the verb, the doing of it. So anyone can gossip, and we all gossip. But there's the gossip, who is the person who accumulates and has a facility with it. There's someone who tells you a story, and there's an utamu there. Alea had given us nimak and marcha, salt and chilies. The person who they talk and the gossip is extra, you know. Okay, then I think there's something about, I've forgotten my numbers. Good gossip is delicious. It is delicious. And I was thinking, especially after Alea gave me the word salt and chilies, nimak and matcha, why is gossip considered to be, why do we use food metaphors to describe gossip? Because good gossip is, you know, Eddie said tea, but you know, that's very North American. you know, but when you say salt and chilies, that one has come with here you can utamu, you can lather, you can, you know, as opposed to the person who just comes and they give you information. Because, you know, information and gossip are not the same thing, but they can be about the same thing. That is what is interesting. One person will come and you'll say, that is information. Another person will come and you will say, that is gossip. And it might be exactly the same information, exactly the same stuff. So that I'll think about that. Okay. And then the final thing, which I think touches a little bit on imagination, but also echoes what Dr. Nyairo said, is that gossip does not invite or need verifiability. We are not in a law court. It is hearsay. It is, what do you want to believe? But also, what will sweeten this encounter we are having together? We are sitting down, we are having a good time. It's a cold day, so you have your mandazis, you have whatever. Some of you eat ndoma, I'm very sorry. And then, you know, but there's like, you know, gossip does not invite or need verifiability. You know, a friend was telling me, and I hope they don't mind me saying this, that, you know, when a visitor was about to leave, their mother would say, hey, I've got gossip for you. And the visitor would sit back down. So there's also a way that gossip invites a kind of lingering with. Yeah. So there's that kind of gossip that comes at the beginning of the conversation. There's the one somewhere in the middle, and there's the one somewhere at the end. And the one of them sometimes is the sweetest one. So sometimes you save it till the end. Okay. So those are all very, very many things. Which let's go any direction, or we can even go.
Let me say something about the lingering bit. That you can be in the house gossiping, then you want to leave. You get to the car, but you don't get into the car. You just stand outside and continue gossiping, or you even walk up to the gate, but you don't leave. You continue gossiping. The lingering bit.
Yeah, I really like the way, Dr. Keguro, you've broken down these various categories of gossip, both in terms of where they take place, but also how they're propelled, you know, how they're given life. And particularly the idea that part of the intimacy we are talking about here has to do with, you know, flavors that you can taste. I remember there was a time in Kenya when the expression used to be used if somebody was saying something and you'd say, wacha kuongeza chumvi. Yeah, I don't think we say that much anymore, but it speaks to this idea of flavors. Again, speaking of gossip in a Kenyan context, and I think we joked about this on Twitter, is, you know, when you talk of gossip, the noun, the person who gossips. But I think as Kenyans at some point, we got tired of the confusion around noun, verb, I don't know, and just decided the person who gossips is called a gossiper. There's a word like that. Let's be clear. Yeah. So, you know, and what does that word do? Does it demote the person or does it elevate them? This for me is an interesting question. I'm going to talk a little bit just before I show you something on my screen, which is going to be, I'll use to kind of flag a few things about how gossip works. Moving from the gossiper to the person being spoken to, do we have a name for that person, the one who receives the gossip? But it's also interesting to see how the two categories overlap. And a friend of mine, an ex-Vitsi as well, Dr. Kaki Muhammad, Professor Kaki Muhammad now, who's the Deputy Vice Chancellor at Maseno University, she saw the poster and immediately sent me a message and said, what are you up to with this conversation? And then when she talked about it, she said, please remember to distinguish between what is said in the gossip and what the person who hears it takes away. And that leads me to how gossip grows. If we use the old children's game, you know, broken telephone, because there's always that variance. And the way this story gathers momentum, and what does it lose and what does it gain? That's always something to study. And that's very much dependent on what Professor Muhammad was flagging around, but what did the person hear? But I'm going to try and share my screen now and just show you. Are we really going to do this?
We shall.
We shall. Okay, let's try one more time. Why wouldn't you see what's on my... Anyway, I'll show it to you at some point. I don't know why it doesn't want to be.
As you look for it, Dr. I remember while I was in high school, there's this set book that we used to call Encounters from Africa. There's a particular story that I've forgotten about. There's this woman who'd when she hears good stories, she would run to every house and says. But now the circulation bit is that by the time the last house in the village gets the story, it is totally different. So I think that is what you are alluding to when you're talking about circulation of gossip. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Are you?
Precisely the idea.
Keguro.
Yes. No.
I'll find.
Joyce, you're cutting out a little bit.
Anyway, we'll find it at some point. It's a collection of no sweetness here. Sorry, I missed that.
Oh, sorry, go on. Oh, wow.
Okay. All right. You're back now. Yes. All right. But now you're muted.
Okay, thank you, Keguro. I wanted us to just think a little bit about Amata Aido's story, something to talk about the way to a funeral.
Yes.
And it's interesting that Keguro talked about the gossip of afterlife, on the way to a funeral. This entire story is constructed around two women walking to a funeral, and the stories that they share about the person whose funeral they are attending. It's a wonderful story because, first of all, it's entirely through dialogue, an incredible feat. The entire story is constructed through dialogue. What's interesting there is that it allows me to think about, okay, what are the different structures really of gossip? And one of the first things I want to flag is that the gossiper is not always the only person who has the information. But even when they are able to tell their story, and we're going to get actively into body language, I hope, Keguro. They're able to tell their story because of the input that they get from the person who is listening. We really must find a name for this person.
Yes.
And so it becomes this exchange, whether the person, so there's going to be this interlocution where sometimes it's surprise, don't tell me. Other times it's So, you know, verbalized, but you can't even find the words. Do you get the point? Okay. There's got to be an invitation, if you like, to continue telling the story. And how that invitation happens by itself can be a narrative itself. And then, as happens again, sometimes when somebody's starting a story, part of how they lure you in to listen is by pretending some restraint. Like they want you to beg them to tell the story. Hey, I should tell you, but maybe let me just shut my mouth. And then now I'm on ears. Now I want to bring it.
Yes.
I don't know if you want to interject on that point, Keguro, before I go on to other aspects of the genre.
No, I love it. Continue. Even me, I'm listening.
You see now, I'm asking you actually to invite me to continue. And the other interesting thing about Amata Aido's story is that these two women are unnamed. The anonymity of the gossiper. Very often in gossip, there's that anonymity where somebody says, I'm not going to tell you who told me, but. Or I can't tell you. I can't tell you who told me. And of course, there's always don't tell anybody I told you. So there are boundaries within gossip. It's useful for us to think about the boundaries between the boundaries that exist in gossip. What's also interesting for me about the structure of gossip, again, coming to those intimacies and the way in which you invite the person to continue. You notice in Amata Aido's story that, you know, the two women, and sometimes I even get confused because she says, oh, my sister. And then I realize, no, they're not actually sisters. She has to position herself in that place of intimacy, that deep connection, so that the rest of the story of the gossip can be shared. So in building intimacies, there are also terms of endearment, words of affirmation, bonds that are affirmed, and so on. Now, one other thing I love about nicknames, I love about gossip, and I have a friend who's so good at this. We play this game all the time. you're gossiping about somebody. You pretend that you're worried about, I don't know, a defamation, those legal things. And so you don't name them, particularly when it's written in WhatsApp and other messages. You don't name them, but you create a nickname that makes it clear who you're talking about without divulging it. So let me just rely on Amata, the story, to give that example. At one point, when there's a conversation around how Auntie Araba became pregnant, the man is referred to as, and I really love this reference, it's actually so funny. Was it not that lawyer or doctor or something like that? The hyphen between lawyer or doctor or something like that. And what that does, because this is fundamentally a story around social relations, a story around the impact of colonial education on structures of in a matrilineal society. Women who have lost their place because they can no longer pick wives for their sons and so on. So it's really a story around what happens to social structure at a certain historical moment. But again, in case you're about to, revere education and see it as a great thing, listen to the way that man's education is trashed. He preyed on a young girl who had come to live in his home with his wife. She's a wife's relative. She comes to learn a few skills. She's going to school and picking up a few skills as well, and learns how to bake. And this man preys on her. Now, we're not going to honor him by pretending that because he's educated, he's a good man. What he has just done is unacceptable, preying on a child. And so the way he's referred to, he has no name, first of all. They cannot mention his name. So he's referred to as that lawyer or doctor or something like that. Something like that. I mean, that is the point of trashing. So let's also pay attention to the ways in which gossip trashes. Trashes characters, trashes behavior, trashes even places, if you like. I want to stop at this point where, I kind of, there's a question Eddie had asked us in the poster around whether gossip is where language started. I was fascinated by that question, and I'm not even sure I have the answer, But I started thinking about the body language of gossip. It's something that you also talked about, Dr. Keguro, about intimacy and performing, the body as performing gossip. When I was young, my sister, my elder sister, and I really enjoyed watching these women who would come home, or maybe sometimes would go to visit my grandmother in the village, and she'd have some. And somebody asked this question. This question has been asked repeatedly around what is the difference between backbiting and gossip. I have always associated backbiting with speaking about somebody when they are actually seated there. But you use codes that don't allow them to know that you're talking about them. And so the body language I was going to talk about that my sister and I really used to enjoy and try and imitate is when these women would use their mouths to point. So talking about Keguro, and he's seated right and say, this one. And they would point with their lips and speak at the same time. That skill. I so wanted to learn that skill. I'm not sure I've ever mastered it, but I was so fascinated by how your mouth could tell a story in two ways, both from what you verbalize and what you don't verbalize. This one here, how dare she? Like, first of all, how dare she? But, so there's also an audacity. An audacity around gossip, or is it that there's an audacity that backbiting has that gossip dare not adopt? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I love that. My God, that has solved something for us. But I want to pick up on intimacy and anonymity and trashing, because what is gossip if not good trashing? Because I was thinking about precisely about that occasion when there are people in the room, and the way that gossip often is this invitation to create its own room within a room. There's a moment when there are people assembled in a room, and you can tell that gossip has started because people turn toward each other and they lean in and their voices go lower. Whereas before they've been sort of like, Mama so-and-so, no. All of a sudden it becomes, so. And you can there's just that moment where there's a temporal and spatial shift, and you're sort of like, something delicious is happening there. Now, if you're nosy, you try to go there, and then sometimes, if you're a younger person, they're sort of like, go get whatever. You just sent to do something random because this is not for you, But there's something about how that intimate space is created, just a bodily vernacular, a turning within, right? Where they'll talk for a little while, it will be in hushed tones, then they'll come back to normal. And you're sort of like, oh, something juicy happened. And if you're lucky, afterwards, someone will come to you and they'll tell you, no, let me tell you what was said. If you're lucky. If you're not lucky, well, you know, that would happen. I was thinking, when you're talking about the professional man, also about when gossip is interesting. And often, not always, but often it's interesting when it targets a person who has set themselves up above, right? So I'm not naming any names, but I'm just saying, when the chairperson of the Christian Union is found doing something, and you can tell a story, or, you know, because we're slightly older now, or if their child is found doing something. You know that woman who just prays in church all the time, and she prays and prays and prays. Let me tell you about her son. That one, he's not found at home before 6 a.m. And if you even walk next to him, you will faint. You'll just faint. Those fumes, you just know. And then her husband, does she even know about the other women? Okay, so I don't gossip, by the way, but I'm just, you know, I used to act in high school. I'm just saying. So there's something about a particular kind of authority figures being brought within the sphere of narrative and sometimes of narrative control, right? Which is also something about how then you then interact with them later on. You know, you won't necessarily tell them, but then you'll be interacting with them, and there's always that thing at the back of your mind of, you know, me, I know. Whatever you're going to tell me about myself, me, I know. I know your story. So there's something about how it doesn't necessarily level power, but it does something much more interesting, I think. It tunnels under in a particular kind of way. So I've seen people who might have been shamed by someone in authority then acquire some gossip about that person, and they can then interact with that person in authority, and the shame is not there in the same way, right? If that makes sense. They are sort of like, it's okay, you can say what you want. Say what you want, because even me, I have a story. I can't tell you, but then I have a story. So
So what's interesting here, Dr. Keguro, from what you're saying, and I love the way, you know, like the little performance, the acting you did there, just reminded me that fundamentally, gossip is also performance. It's storytelling, but it's also performance. Because look at what the body is doing. Why you're telling this story about, you know, the chairperson. Why aren't you looking up? Why do you turn aside? What is this body doing? What are those signifiers that you're there? But the other, you know, absolutely important thing that you said there is around power. What gossip does with power, because it's both a taking of power, and that by itself kind of suggests that you're deflating somebody else's power and appropriating it for yourself. And people in authority will always be the subject of gossip, because sometimes their authority disempowers people or leaves them feeling a certain kind of way, and they need to take back their moment, however temporary, however basic, but they kind of feel at the end of the day, we are all still human. Stuart Hall's memoirs, which were published after he died, A Life Between Two Islands. What's it? Familiar Strangers. Stuart Hall, always fascinating in terms of the way he framed cultural studies. He talked about gossip and social order in Jamaica, the Jamaica he grew up in as a teenager, and watching how fundamentally one of the things about what he calls the Kingston set, one of the things we were very concerned about was people's color. Who had a bit of white blood, who didn't, how did they get it? And that gossip fueled the set. And you could see what was happening, as he argues, is that there were, you know, there could be skin variations even within one family, as he says, like as in his own family. And I'll just read that little passage there. Jamaican society gossiped, monitored intensely, and speculated riotously about this perpetual confusing fluidity of the body. When I was a child, it's what Jamaica was. Such a social system requires that we think not only about the relations which sustain it, but also how day by day it is reproduced. So gossip as policing, gossip as social order, gossip as reproducing a particular structure that people in authority feel comfortable with, or people who are aspiring to be in authority. And I think that those are fascinating thoughts around gossip and power. But I think, you know, yeah, I was thinking really that now we can talk about songs, because
Yes.
I don't want, and I'm going to provoke you, Keguro, and say, but what does the Bible say about gossip? And I know we didn't come here to do moral and ethnic things, but I have to provoke.
Oh, yes, we did. We did.
But here's the
We
thing.
came to do everything.
We came to do everything. So let's do the whole range. Yeah, we'll come back to
Yeah.
religion and gossip a bit later on, which I have no authority on, and I'm going to rely on you there. But what I can't talk about, what I can't talk about is, you asked me playfully for a playlist on gossip. Oh, there's a whole range. I started in Bwana Nipe Pesa, which is, some of you might know, is Super Mazembe, right? And what's interesting about this song is, when you listen to it, you get struck by, I was always struck by who is telling the story. Because she's asking this man to bring money to feed his children because his wife is never around. What was the word? Anapenda kutanga-tanga. Yeah? But the other thing about her, the reason they're gossiping about her is that she's an alcoholic. Yeah? She's an alcoholic. And the issue is her children have nothing to eat and she's not at home. And I was always like, okay, so who are we talking about? Who are we talking about? And then you realize that this man also, in some way, is being censored, because why must his wife, for whatever the reasons for her breakdown, cannot take care of these children? Why is somebody pleading with him to come and take care of this children? What is wrong with this man? But the song doesn't really allow you to think about that man, because the chorus keeps repeating, yeah, bibi yako anapenda kutanga-tanga. So the focus is on his wife, not on him. And so that's one thing one song I picked up. What I also picked up from listening to that song the other day is the way in which, how does gossip endorse itself? There will always be a reference to other people who have witnessed the same. Even the neighbors, hata majirani, wamechoka kumuona, huwa wakisema, fungeni milango wanakuja. So notice how the neighbors are elevated. They are the final witness. It's not just me saying it. And sometimes I imagine there was a domestic helper or a relative in the house who is actually the persona in this song, who is pleading with this man. But part of how she, and I say she because I'll talk a little bit about how that song was done, but I say she because there's a particular tenor adopted in that song. If you listen to even the music, the shrillness of the guitars and so on, is really what creates the idea that this is gossip. And even the vocalist adopts a particularly high pitch. But the idea then that because the neighbors have said it, there's something wayward about this woman. Even the neighbors don't want to say. Now, a woman whose neighbors can't, that one, forget about her. So this is, again, part of the trashing, yeah? So that's one song I really love. What might be interesting for those who don't know is that Super Mazembe actually collaborated with a South African group in the recording of this song. And that was an interesting moment. Again, Nairobi was always this central place where bands from Eastern Congo, bands from Tanzania, came to record. And that's what happened with this particular Bwana Nipe Pesa song, is that it was recorded by Super Mazembe and a South African band. I'm not sure who the vocalist is. I'm still trying to find out. And when was this song done? Probably 1975. It comes off the back of another song, Sam Kahiga, Sugar Mami. Sugar Mami is another interesting song as far as gossip is concerned, because the way he starts the song is, he doesn't tell us the name of the woman. There is a woman, a very rich woman, living in the flats. Yeah? She has no name. So how do we, it's Anti-Waharia before Anti-Waharia. You know, there's a very rich woman living in the flat. I love that. But also, I'm intrigued by Bwana Nipe Pesa because Sam Kahiga had written another song, which I think he recorded with his sister. The band used to be called The Cousins. And it actually has that line, Bwana Nipe Pesa. So I'm wondering what came before. You know, there's all sorts of politics in the writing and recording of music. But again, we can look to Sam Kahiga specifically for a song about gossip in Sugar Mami. But then, because of the different persona that play out in the song, you know, the persona owns up to the idea that this woman has been coming to take him to Zambezi, 680, all sorts of places. Incidentally, the song was banned on VOK radio not because it was dealing with a delicate kind of moral issue around women with money playing with young boys, but because it was advertising particular restaurants and hotels. 680 Zambezi. I'm pretty sure that was a pretext, but anyway. Anyway.
If I can pick up on two things, I'm wondering if you'd talk a little bit more about, because you started off by talking about the role that gossip has in cultural studies and literary studies, right?
Yeah.
I would actually even say that history as a field and anthropology and a lot of field work is just gossip, but that's just me. No one attack me. I don't know these things. I'm just saying. So I'm wondering what it is about how the circulation of particular objects, songs, and stories create space for things that perhaps we already know, right? But that then also attach themselves to different objects. So because there's a way, sort of like, so Samkahiga said this and no one knows who the woman is. I am sort of willing to bet very much that people who are around Samkahiga, that this was a story, this was a story, you know, that then became a song.
Absolutely.
But as it travels across time, it then attaches to different things. So there's a way, I'm always fascinated by how cultural objects travel across time, and because of their status as cultural objects, can do a kind of attaching work that is not that does not necessarily open oneself up to libel or to whatever, right? You know, you know, that no, it's just a song. It's just a song. You know, it's just a song. So on one hand, there's this sort of like it's just a song. On the other hand, because you have written about this extensively and I've learned so much from you, you've also shown us that songs are this incredible sites of power and of mobilizing people and of gathering feeling and of holding history and of moving things and shifting things, right? So there's something about what happens when we think about gossip as a sort of, not simply as a scene of encounter and of intimacy between people who know each other. And there's a really good question here about the gendering of gossip, which we'll get to. Not simply about scenes of intimacy, but also as scenes of dispersal and attachment and reattachment. And I think cultural objects do that so beautifully.
Yeah. No, that's a really important thing you said about the work that songs do. They give people an entry point, not only to talk about something, but to legitimize it.
Yeah.
And also to give it bigger publics, right? Yeah. And so you can imagine for Super Mazembe, if they were talking about a neighbor down the street, the fact that they collaborated with the South African group Low 6, LO, and then the number SIX, Low 6, the fact that, you know, so that kind of distanced them, but also allowed them to tell this story. And then, as you rightfully say, there's a mobility now, a momentum that story gets, whether it's Sam Kahiga's story or whether it's the Super Mazembe one, they gain some momentum. I don't know whether you ever thought of George Michael's Careless Whisper.
All right.
In the same vein. Does it censure gossip or what does it do? Does it endorse gossip? And I was thinking about
no, I have to sing it. No, I have to
now you have to sing it, right? Now you have to sing it. Time can never mend the careless whisper of a good friend.
Oh,
what is the caution? What is the caution there? And also, guilty feet have got no
rhythm.
I'm never going to dance again. Guilty feet have got no
but you know, that's just a history of whiteness, huh? Guilty feet have got no rhythm. Just a history of whiteness.
Well, that's I'm not sure what instrument it is they listen to, but yes, guilty feet, feet generally. But to your point, the thing about it is, when I thought about Careless Whisper, when you provoked me about the soundtrack of gossip, songs about gossip, what that did is it made me think about how language, any language, let's think in English because we're already thinking in English, and because maybe it's the most fluent language for that we think it. Think about the saying, eavesdroppers often eavesdroppers will hear ill about themselves. What's the proverb? What's the saying?
Whatever it is, but yeah,
who is being cautioned there? Is it the person who is eavesdropping or the one who is gossiping? One of the fundamentals of that saying is to make it clear that gossip will always be there. So the
Yeah.
crime here is
Yeah.
what? Eavesdropping. And that's a
Yeah.
very, if you think about it in the context of kind of Victorian England and it's kind of Christian ethos, that's a really, interesting way of subverting biblical teachings against gossip. Yeah. I said I was no expert on the Bible, and let me not go there. One of my favorite songs about gossip surely is Billie Jean. She says,
yeah,
who is this Billie Jean?
Who
The kid is
Billie
not my
Jean,
son.
actually?
Yeah. She's just a girl who says that I am not,
Yeah.
So somebody has been talking out there. So look at what gossip also does. Look at what cultural productions like song do. They give you an opportunity to refute gossip.
Yeah.
Cultural products give you an opportunity to refute gossip, to refute half-truths about you. Of course, there's rumors. The same girl by Asha. Yeah. No, interesting ones. Interesting. I think one of the ones that I grew up. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking about the beginning of that Adele song, right? I heard. Just that I heard, but I don't know if I heard qualifies something as gossip.
Yes,
or is it just
including Marvin Gaye. I heard it on the grapevine.
Yeah.
I heard it on the grapevine.
The grapevine is also a good one, yeah.
Absolutely. Marvin Gaye, I heard it on the, well, actually the song was done by several Motowners, but I think it was Gladys Knight who did it before, but Marvin Gaye is the one who really gave it. I heard it on the grapevine.
Yeah.
And so what does now gossip do? It gives you the opportunity to, and the cultural product gives you the opportunity to confront all of your hurts and all of the things being said about you. That's an interesting one. So two other songs I remember from growing up that actually fascinated me. There's a song called Sheri Bondowe that I always really love by Mayaula Mayoni, who actually, this is an interesting Congolese musician because he was a second-year student at the University of Dar es Salaam. He was actually on their soccer team when he sang this song. Again, in the 70s, not the sort of things we associated singers with being at the university, but here we are. We have to, kind of do away with all sorts of assumptions that we had about music and musicians. Yeah. Mayola Mayoni is an interesting song. I loved it for its rhythm. I didn't understand the language. I looked at the lyrics of the sleeve, it meant nothing. But later on as an adult, I had to follow it up. And what's fascinating about Sheri Bondowe is that this woman owns the gossip about her that she's a prostitute. Mm. And she says, yes, I am a prostitute. Yes, this is what I am doing. And, I was absolutely fascinated by the guts. But again, notice it is a man singing about a woman. Yeah. So, or singing even as a woman, right? Speaking of men and women and the gendering of gossip, one song I listened to growing up that I always thought, oh my God, Joseph Kamaru had a song about gossip called Mosheneneko, which is gossip in Kikuyu.
Yes.
And his big kind of flag there, he raised the red flag and he was like, gossip breaks homes.
Yeah.
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 In fact, the way he says it is that it throws away homes. If you think the language very figurative, gossip will destroy, wreck, or render a home asunder. Yeah. So, and I'm sure in all sorts of languages, if I could just think of more songs, there's all sorts of songs around gossip. What's interesting now, and we really must get to this point, Dr. Keguro, because we've been skirting around it. Please open it up. The gendering of gossip, because isn't this what this song is saying? It's telling this woman, don't listen to what they're saying about your husband. Don't listen to what they're saying. It will break your home. So she should remain there even if she's going to die because it's the gossipers who said.
Yeah. So I think there's something about both the official sources, right, and what those official sources are and what they do and the things they rely on. But official sources are also, of course, sources that are enfleshed and embodied, right? So that if we go to the Bible, which again, I've not read the Bible in 20 years, forgive me, but when you have those things that are sort of like any accusation brought by a woman needs is it like 3 to 5 witnesses to verify it? There's something like that, and I forget those Bible scholars. Joki, I can see you're there, so you can confirm that for us. But it needs something. There's something about, and I think this is true across many laws that a woman's word needs a particular number of witnesses to verify it, so that it can be verifiable. right? Whereas a man's word in general does not. It would not need the same number of witnesses, or it would not need witnesses at all. So there's something that gossip does in filling in that gap, right? Where one's word and one's embodiment is understood as itself a kind of testimony that cannot be believed, right? If you come as a woman, you are bringing gossip, unless you have the men who will then support you and turn what is your gossip into something that is verifiable or something that can be believed, right? So there's a certain way that bodies become engossiped, if you will, right? Which means not verifiable and not believable under certain circumstances, in the eyes of the law, to go back to what you said earlier on, right? That there is a certain kind of, this is not empirical, this is gossip. How do we know it's gossip? Because it's coming from a particular body. It's coming from a particular embodiment itself becomes the alibi, not to believe that. But I think this also, I don't like using the word subvert because, I think it also provides different ways to navigate things, right? Because sometimes you don't have to go, people who take the direct road all the time, it's very boring. And sometimes you just need to tunnel around until you find what you need. So on the one hand, I think there's a kind of relatively benign gossip, yeah, which is just the thing that flavors a conversation. You're talking to someone, and they just say, let me tell you. And in fact, it always starts that way. Well, at least many of my friends, I can see your gossip is there. Me, I can tell you, and let me tell you, right? Or something similar to that. And that announces itself, right? And it's again, it's relatively benign. This is not, it's juicy, but it's not juicy in a sort of like you're breaking a home, whatever that might mean. But of course, part of what you meant, I think you were saying with the Keguro song, is that gossip is also a way that women and other minoritized people have passed along information that they think someone else might know that might be useful, right? And we might see many injunctions against gossip, in the Keguro version, as people who are trying to protect themselves. And we can think about social situations where that information might be useful to have, might be useful to know, might be useful to mobilize, to deploy, even to protect yourself in some way, right? I do think there is something, so there's a thing going on online for a while, people are sort of like men gossip just as much as women. And I think, yeah, obviously, I mean, everyone gossips. But I think the power dynamics might be slightly different, and the way that certain things are received might be slightly different, right? And a lot of this just goes back to things like power and resources and who has them and who wields them in whatever situation across different levels of class, and the way things are gendered, just it's just across different levels of class. So that's a gossip between men, right? About another man is, it's sort of, it's very, let me say something very, 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 very basic and very stupid, but I think, might make sense. It's very difficult to ruin a man's reputation through gossip. It just is. You're sort of like, he drinks a lot. Okay, so he's married and he's got 3 mistresses. Okay, so, he took a loan and he didn't pay it back. Okay, so that one, he performs crooked land deals. In fact, give me his number, I need land, right? It's very difficult to ruin someone's reputation in those particular ways along a sort of ethical or moral or even a standing within a community. The only things that might get it is if the rumor is inclined towards, he's a little bit gay. Then there might be something, but even that's not necessarily true. It might not necessarily work, right? And even the sort of like, because I'm thinking back to the 80s, and the 90s, even the sort of like, unajua huyo amekonda, and when we said that in the 90s, we meant something very specific. sorry, people who don't speak Swahili. Amekonda, he's grown thin, which in the 90s would translate into HIV/AIDS. But even that was not necessarily something malignant. It might have effects. It might have some effects, but not in the same way. Whereas I think for women, for more minoritized people, gossip works in different ways. If you're a domestic worker, and you're a woman, a hint of gossip that the menfolk in the house might like you too much will get you fired. That one. She left her last position because she just liked the men too much. Whether it's true or not, that will get you fired, right? So there are ways that power is distributed unevenly, where gossip genders and is gendering, right? It's always a way that power is distributed. But I'm not around certain people, so some of this I may need Eddie to jump in here to tell us, what do men gossip about?
Do men even gossip?
Yes, Eddie, do men gossip?
No, actually, I mean, it's good you've asked me that question, because there are several questions here asking exactly about that. So the question about men gossiping, someone said it's hating, it's not gossiping actually. And I don't know what that means, as in what is the power relations between gossip about other men is what is called hating. You see? Yeah, so I don't understand what that means for me. So maybe that's a question you can pick up now for. And also remember, we have some questions here that you guys need to answer before we move on to some other 2, 3, 4 points.
Yeah. On this question of, sorry, Dr. Keguro, you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead, please.
Yeah, there was a question I saw flash on the screen at some point around, why do people who are gossiping adopt kind of effeminate gestures? Yeah. And they could be women, they could be men. And I think that's, again, just in that kind of gendering of this genre, in which we pretend that it is only women who do it, or because men have been brought up being cautioned against gossip, being cautioned against behaving like women, when they do need to go, because again, I think one of the things we have established here is gossip as need. There are certain kinds of information that can only be passed on, that there are bonds that are built. So we've established the need. And when men have that need, what they must then do is, mimic the behavior of women to kind of distance themselves from that very thing that they are doing. So it's as if they wear another body, that a man must wear the body of a woman, gestures and so on, in order to, even the voice, like you remember I was saying of the song, the particular pitch that Wana Nipepesa has is supposed to be effeminate. Yeah, I mean, women can sing in bass, in baritone, or whatever, but this particular idea of it must be some kind of soprano for it to pass, because a man cannot possibly be seen gossiping. And that brings me to an interesting question. What's the difference between gossip and rumor? Is there a difference?
Eddie, you're the one who most recently read Louise White, so you know. You're just returning back to your PhD exams.
I'm only nodding my head because that question was asked here. And Keguro, maybe you can go first.
So I actually was thinking about to go back to the question of proximities. I think gossip relies on a kind of intimacy, that either you know someone, or you have seen something, or I have seen something. And even if I don't know the person you're talking about, you know them, or you know someone who knows them. So there's a kind of relation of proximity, so that activates gossip as such, right? So it doesn't circulate as simply emptiness. Right. Whereas rumor can really sort of be like, me, I was just, have you heard, blah, blah, blah. And I think increasingly, for me, rumor is so much tied to celebrity and such. That it's not so much gossip, even though sometimes it can be. But I think rumor can float in a slightly different kind of way. But I also think the intent of rumor is almost always damage.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily sure the intent of gossip is always damage. Is always damage, because I think gossip builds bonds between people. I'm going to sit in Joyce's kitchen. We are going to have some tea, and then Joyce, hey, let me tell you, yes, and then you'll clap your hands, and then we'll talk, right? So there's something that we're trying to build when we are gossiping, right? We're trying to sustain a kind of relation. We're not simply passing information. It's not simply news, right? And I think this, to just swerve a little bit and then we'll come back. And I think, someone had asked online, so what has happened when we talk about WhatsApp and when we talk about the pandemic and social distancing? People haven't seen each other. And when we talk about what happens online, does that qualify as gossip? And I don't know. I don't have an answer.
Yeah.
I do know there's gossip by phone. When my mother couldn't leave her bed.
Yeah.
That phone call at 6:57 a.m. would still come in. 6:57 a.m. Okay, great. And then it would continue, right? So there's also a way that gossip networks, and especially for older women, and especially, this is simply what I was around. Older women who perhaps are less mobile, are not getting out of the house as much as people who are going to work, right? There really is a kind of gossip network that, importantly, from what I saw, has to happen over the phone. It cannot be a WhatsApp message. Right? The WhatsApp message will be, it needs voice. The WhatsApp message can be, hey, we shall talk, or let me call you.
Yeah.
Right? But then gossip as a sort of like long DM, I don't know, someone has mentioned many, many words. That is not, and maybe I'm wrong. But I think there's something about gossip that's very much about the voice, about the intimacy of the voice and the intimacy of the ear that is receiving it. And like Joyce, like you said earlier on, the intimacy of that response. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. My sister.
Yes.
Yeah.
It must be urged on. Yeah.
Yeah. It must be urged on. Yeah.
And even when the person, the urging on is hilarious, because even when the person says, don't tell me, that's not what they mean. They mean you must continue. Again, breaking down the signifiers and understanding that a red flag can actually be a green one. It actually means go, continue. It's interesting. So it's, and this is why I keep saying that gossip is a literary genre, because there are ways in which it works that are around standard literary practice, around metaphor, around around contradictions and ironies. Like all of those things are in there.
Joyce.
If you're hearing the siren, it has nothing to do with me. This is standard America. There's always a siren.
Joyce.
Because the gossip might start. That Joyce, as Joyce was at the webinar, they came for her. Anyway.
Yes.
Let's go back to gossip and rumor.
Joyce, sorry. There's just one question here that I want to that I would like you to address concerning what you've just said. Right? If you can read it. There are two. One by Lombe, who's asking if you can see the message.
Gossip needs tone and tools of speech. Maybe gifs and names may stand in when we use text.
Or maybe
is that the one you're talking about?
Yes, then the next one as well.
Maybe something about the ephemeral nature of speaking also feeds into that. Yeah, I mean, again, I don't really have answers to all of these things, but I like what they're provoking. I like the way they're provoking the idea that there are times we must hear a voice for the sweetness and the intimacies that accompany gossip to actually be effective. I think when gossip is written, surely it must be people who know one another very well, because when it is written, there will be codes that need to be broken down. You can't, you know how you could be at a party and you just happen to be standing next to somebody and somebody else walks in and you start gossiping about their scarf. Well, you can't do that in writing. You can't, but I'm going to come back to gossiping in an age of social media in a minute. Somebody asked about memes, and I've been sent a meme by a good friend and fellow, thinker, Florence Ipala. This was an old meme, an old tweet, I think, from Humans of New York. Again, sorry, I can't share the screen. This is from around 4th of July, 2016. And it says, two women sitting, looks like they could be sitting on a park bench or at a bus stop. We don't have any hobbies, but we do try to get together a few times a month to judge people and complain about things.
Yes.
Gossip is about judging people. Isn't that a fascinating thing to think about? And it comes back to what you were saying, Keguro, earlier about the hierarchies of power that happen with gossip, how the disempowered will, claim something for themselves. But let's come to gossip and social media. How does gossip happen in an age of social media where it's not necessarily verbal? And I will come back later on to the question of gossip versus rumor. What's interesting for me here, gossip in an age of social media, isn't the subtweet the best kind of gossip you have seen in writing?
Yes. Yeah.
I didn't talk about it, Keguro. I just asked, isn't the subtweet... You know how you're on your timeline, you see something like, what are they talking about? And this is the problem with Twitter, that to answer that question might cost you an hour. So, you make up your mind. Either you have an hour to find the answer or you don't, and you move on. Subtweeting is so powerful. Because, and for a variety of reasons, I'm not saying I don't subtweet myself. I'm just trying to understand why people subtweet. And I'm not saying I subtweet either. I'm saying, why do people subtweet? The streets of social media are, don't lie to yourselves. People are not equal on social media. Whether it's because of the number of followers somebody has, or it's because the kind of people, the kind of things he posts, the kind of subjects he posts that draw people to him or her, or it's the kind of, I said number of followers, I said the kind of, or the position they hold in society, because not everybody's anonymous on social media. And so very often you will find when people are up against that kind of person, they're not interested in a sledge. They're not interested in a shouting match that's going to go on all day. Also because on Twitter, there are people who don't know when to stop, as in life. And so you make your comment as a subtweet and you move on, you get it out of your system because somebody needed to say it, but no, you're not going to stand there and yell all day in a back and forth. So I think we need to think about how tweeting can happen in writing. I think the subtweet is a fine example of that, in my opinion. WhatsApp, it's very hard to be tweeting, to be gossiping in a WhatsApp group, because there are these groups you find yourself in, you don't even know how you got into them, and you don't know everybody there, and you kind of think, let me be very careful. But also gossip in that WhatsApp forum, the one of the cousins in the family. And we've said everything we needed to say there. Is it possible that rumor? Is it possible that I was going to ask actually earlier on whether rumor is that which is written without authentication, and gossip is that which is spoken? That would be too simple. I don't think that's how it works. I think that's just those are very simple categories. I think actually that rumor is what men have always called what they do as gossip. That rumor gets elevated into something of importance, like the country's future depends on this little tidbit. The country's future depends on talking about the president's side chick. But we are going to call it a rumor because then, I think that rumor is something that gets very much elevated onto a bigger stage as opposed to kind of small micro politics of, everyday domestic kind of environment. I think rumor takes on a bigger kind of amplification. I'm really just thinking out loud here.
So there's something that Patricia Keguro has written here, which I love. So I'm just going to read it out. And I think it comes back to what it means to think about gossip as creating intimacies, right? So this is gossip. Or asking if you've heard something before I can say what I've heard. And if you haven't heard, then I can't say. But also, what have you heard? I can only share if you've heard what I've heard, right? I mean, perhaps it's written too much Kenyanese, but it makes so much perfect sense to me. Like I'm reading and I'm going, yes, have you heard? You haven't heard? I can't, So there's something about what is solicited as a kind of space of sharing, right? So that, and we'd gone earlier on, much earlier on, we'd asked, what do we call the person who receives the gossip? And I think one thing about prolonged people who gossip over long periods of time, years, decades, whatever, is that it's often reciprocal, right? Today, I come with a tasty piece of whatever. Tomorrow or next week, you come with a tasty piece of whatever, right? There's something, so there's a mutuality to it, right? We're going back and forth because your neighbors are not my neighbors necessarily, right? And even if we have the same neighbors, you might be on the left side, I'm on the right side. So what you see happening is not necessarily what I see happening. But sometimes we might also look at the neighbor in the middle and then we just confirm stories, right, about what's happening. So there's something that gossip is always building and networking in a kind of way. And I think this also means that there are ways that prolonged networks of gossip can be very difficult to get into, right? If you're not one of them, if you're not, but also depending on, so I'm thinking about, like, there's the gossip I can tell a casual friend, and then there's I don't gossip, by the way, please. The gossip I can tell a casual friend, and then there's the gossip I'll tell my good friends, right? And some of that is just layers of trust. There's the gossip I can tell someone who I know will just go spread it, because their mouth can't close. And then there's the gossip that I'll tell someone who I know, they know when to keep it closed, right?
Yeah.
And which also means that there's a way to think about gossip as something that you can use, right? There's a way you can weaponize gossip, because gossip doesn't rely on verifiability at all. And if you know how to season it, if you know how to season it, no, but that's the right way. Yeah, go ahead.
And you season it with tidbits like even the neighbors said. That just kind of creates another flavor. I think it's Pumla who has alerted us. I like this flag, Pumla, about so when you see the subtweet and you don't have an hour, you just DM that friend who always knows everything and you ask them, what are they talking about? Yeah, so there's shortcuts to this thing. Thank you for that, Pumla. I think, and the other thing is, the other thing that everybody on the, and thank you so much for the guys on the chat. Thank you everybody who's here, really keeping us going with this gossip, is what name do we give to this person who is listening to the gossip? Gossipy has been suggested, but I love this idea of the person who listens to gossip is a friend.
Yeah.
Whether that is temporary or it's a friend. Look, one of the other important points you've made there, Dr. Keguro, is that gossip requires trust. There are levels to gossip, and so gossip requires trust.
Yeah.
That whisper about somebody's scarf at a party as they walked in that I said to a stranger is because I noticed that, like me, she didn't seem to know anybody else at the party. And so I'm trying to build a little thing here. I'm trying to grow a friend. Yeah. So for that moment, she's a friend. I love this. It is a friend. Yeah. You don't gossip with strangers. And when you do gossip with strangers, it's because you're trying to build a friendship or build something. That's a fascinating thing to think about. But, there's a way in which we were talking about the structure of gossip. It's a back and forth, the interlocutor, back and forth, they share. But you pointed out something else, Dr. Keguro, which is, I can't always be the one bringing you the gossip. At some point, you must also. So it's an exchange.
Yep.
Gossip is exchange, both in the way a particular story is told, but in the way a relationship is built over time. I don't know. I'm thinking here. Let's go back to sites of gossip, places where people gossip. Those of you who have done development work, I'm sure you've all had stories about, thank you so much. I see Professor Muhammad has joined us. A person who listens to gossip in addition to being a friend is an ally. Yes. And yes, Professor Muhammad, I did talk about earlier on before you joined us, I think, I did talk about this thing where there's what is said and there's what people hear or what they choose to hear, and then how that gossip advances. Yeah, but I was saying, those of you who've done development work, I'm sure you've had all sorts of stories around, water projects. There was one in Kakamega, Kenfiko was set up, and now suddenly every household got water. And so now there's no need to gather and congregate. Yeah. As we do development work, let us be careful not to interfere with relationships. Yeah. If you take away the site of assembly, if you take away the site of exchange and humanizing and me time, because it's also about me time. Yes, I may have gone to fetch water, but it's really the one time when I am alone in this house I share with 17 people who have no sense of, social distance. So this idea that chamas, for example, we gather, yes, to collect the money and to think about the next set of apartments that we are building, but in there we also do something else. There's another architecture that we are building. And so you realize that when development work happens and now everybody has a tap in their home, we then have the chama, because we must find a site of assembly.
Yep.
We must find a moment, a space in which we exchange these things. So one of the things somebody said to me the other day about sites of assembly in the context of COVID and the fact that we're keeping away from each other, we're social distancing and whatever, I was talking to somebody who saw this poster at Jeff Obure, and he said to me, these days, even men have no idea what is happening in politics because they can't muhahe in pubs. So apparently, men go to pubs, and the word they use is muhahe. They can't muhahe in pubs. So say that for what they see on WhatsApp, they can't verify anything. And I found it interesting that he used the word verify. If you see something on WhatsApp, you must go to the pub to verify. This is very, very interesting around the relationship between what is said, what is written, as well as, of course, who is saying and who is writing, right?
Yeah, I love that. I was thinking, I had a thought, and then it seems to have just gone somewhere. Maybe Eddie, would you like to pick through some of the questions, and we can try to address some of them while I'm trying to recover the thought that I had, which has gone somewhere.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. This was the thought. Sorry to interrupt you, Eddie. This was the thought. I was thinking about how gossip spreads and travels along networks of intimacy, and what happens when the gossip comes back and the gossip is about you. Right? And that moment when sometimes, because of how gossip is often anonymized, I don't know. So I'm thinking about this experience. I'm not saying I've had it. I'm not saying I've had it. But this experience where you're hearing a story and it's very juicy and you're enjoying yourself. And at some point you're like, that's me. And there's something that it does, right? And I'm not sure what it is that it does, but I do know that this is something that, if you've lived long enough, this has happened. That at some point something was just said and it was sounded very juicy, it was said to you, and then you were just like, oh, it is the person who wears scarves around their necks all the time. It is me. But then it's also an interesting situation because you don't want to confirm it, right? You don't want to tell the person who's telling you this thing that is me, because it is gossip, right? So you're put in this really interesting situation where you're, anyway, okay.
Interesting thought.
That was the thought, but I will, Eddie, would you like to pursue questions for us, please?
Yes. There are like 3-4 questions that I see from the Q&A. I don't know if you can see from behind them, but there's something I find interesting on the chat by Gashori Nduma, who says, I don't know if you can see it. When people say that, by the way, I'm only telling you because you should know. You know me, I don't gossip, but I'm only telling you. I found that very interesting. Anyway, let's go to this question, the first question. For the others, we have
but sorry, Eddie, can we pause on that for a second?
Okay, sure.
Because sure. I think there's something there about the bond that someone is trying to sustain, but also maybe, but it can be double-edged, right? Because this could be someone who's trying to protect you. Because when they say something like that, it often means it's about something in proximity to you, right? So sometimes it really could be they're trying to protect your feelings. At other times, this could be the person who has brought all the salt to pour into your wound, and they want to see how you're going to react. But there is a relation of proximity when someone says something like that to you. I thought you should know. right? And in fact, when someone says, I thought you should know, you really should just, as the Bible would say, gird your loins and put on your full armor of defensiveness, because what they're going to say is, and sometimes that's when you have to learn how to put on a stone face, right? You're sort of like, But then I think also in that situation, one of the things that's really interesting is you can refuse to receive the gossip, right?
Don't tell me, and actually mean it.
You can say that, or you can listen to it, but not respond the way they want you to respond, right? So they're looking for you to say, go on, continue. And you can just be, one of the worst things is you're trying to give someone juicy gossip and they're just staring at you. And they're saying nothing. Because it's not landing, it's landing nowhere. In which case, you failed. The gossip has failed. It's not gossip, it's whatever you brought.
Yeah. That's a really interesting observation, because we're talking about the structure of gossip. What are the different signifiers and the things that advance it. But what you're also saying is we need to pay attention to the ways in which it's shut down, and not necessarily through the censure of, say, religion or a supervising adult or whatever, but the person actually who is the recipient, this friend or gossipee, actually decides, I'm not a part of this, I'm not going to do it. And it made me think about bodily parts and how they come into gossip. Earlier we talked about the lips that are used to point and talk at the same time. There's also the ears. And sometimes you hear somebody, but where are your ears? Or somebody will say, me, my ears, and they'll actually cover their ear. So the ways in which we halt gossip, and sometimes even signifying the ears in that very dramatic way. Because gossip, we're saying that this moment when the gossip comes back to you, I think it's Neo who's saying something very interesting there. Sometimes one tells another, and then they come back and tell you the same gossip, and it becomes awkward to say, but I told you that. Because often it means that whatever you tell them, even with you can't tell anyone, will spread to others. So there's broken trust. We actually do need to talk about the damage that gossip does. And I'll flag, again, George Michael here and Careless Whisper. Time can never mend the careless whispers of a good friend. To the heart and mind, ignorance is kind. There's no comfort in the truth. Pain is all you'll find. So that moment in which the gossip comes back to you and it involves you, you're part of that narrative. You're the subject. You thought that you were the one, but now you're the subject. It reminded me of, again, going back to the example I had flagged earlier, the text, something to talk about on the way to a funeral by Amata Aido. And I think, Keguro, you're the one who talked about the 90s, the funerals in the 90s. And people talk about, that one is so thin. And I remember us talking about this actually, literally on the way to a funeral with a friend. And the person started talking about, because you remember in the 90s, everybody died from a short illness, bravely born. Nobody died from HIV/AIDS.
Yes.
But as we went to this funeral, then the person started telling me about, he had been with so and so and so and so. And I said, stop. Because when you start drawing those graphs, soon they are going to involve me and you, And I'm using that example to show how gossip makes one very uncomfortable when you realize that that story being told could be about you. And so when do you become uncomfortable? It is when what is being said is not being said to build, it's being used to trash and to hurt and to demean and whatever, as opposed to sharing information that can actually help somebody. So yes, it is important to talk about gossip as harmful. But I'm going to provoke you because I keep trying to bring us to religious studies. We have talked about engineering having no use for gossip, and the law saying it doesn't want hearsay, and us in literary and cultural studies delighting
engineers gossip.
They gossip, but their work
engineers gossip, and I know you know lawyers gossip. I know you know.
I have no idea
gossip.
What you're talking about. The Fifth Amendment. But so here's the thing. So from the Bible, we get in Proverbs 18:8, the words of a gossip are like choice morsels. They go down to the inmost parts.
Oh, nice. Even the Bible knows. Even the Bible knows.
Because the Bible is about people.
But I was thinking about, the Bible's about people, but I was thinking about Okay, this one I keep coming back to, right? Which is Hosea, the book of Hosea. So if you don't know, Hosea is told by God, you go marry a prostitute. That's the word the Bible uses. I'm going to use it. Go marry a prostitute, and when she cheats on you, you will feel the pain that I, as God, feel when the Israelites cheat on me, right? And part of that story is that everyone is talking about what this woman is doing. Kasheri is here, and so I am going to ask for the name of the woman which I have forgotten, and which I know Kasheri will remember. And so this, and if you actually read a lot of the Bible narratives closely, they're strung through with gossip. What is Mary Magdalene's reputation? Where does that come from? Right? What is the reputation of so and so, and where does it come from? Who heard what, where, when, and how did that, how did that emerge? So gossip runs through a whole bunch of ways we think about religion. But even if we think about it in terms of Gomer, Hosea's wife, thank you, Kasheri, Gomer, Gomer. But even if we think about it, not through religion necessarily, but through tradition and through myth and through legend, right? The story that is carried and where the story is carried and what the story can do. So I'm thinking about the weaver bird who comes to the house where the young woman has been imprisoned by the ogre, right? And the weaver bird goes and carries the story. And one of the things you have to learn is how to listen to the weaver bird, right? So that gossip is also a kind of training in listening. Can you listen to the weaver bird story? Because it might have something there for you. So it's building relations, but it's also, can you listen? Do you have to use a religious word, do you have the discernment to listen and to hear the story? To hear not simply what is being said, the words, the potatoes or whatever, but to hear the structure, which is what you keep pointing out, to hear the structure of what is being said, right? Because it might be a structure about a neighborhood. It might be a structure about a business. Someone might not necessarily tell you that person you're doing business with is Amcora. They might not tell you that.
Yeah.
They might just say, that one, I had when they were in high school, blah, blah, blah. So you're not being, gossip doesn't necessarily direct you. It is not do and don't do, because especially if you're talking with a peer, that do and don't do doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
What gossip can do is it can nudge, it can suggest, it can hint, But then ultimately gossip, I think also, because you also don't want to be in the position of saying, I told them not to, right? Gossip can leave space open, but it requires discernment. You have to listen and to hear not just the words, but the thing that is accompanying the words.
Yeah, it kind of brings me back to. Yeah, it brings me back to this point. Earlier on when we started, and I was talking about literary and cultural studies are attuned to gossip because fundamentally it's about a reading of character and situation. Both the person who's telling the story, okay, and the people that they're talking about. There's always something to study there. And I love what you're saying, that in gossip, there's always an opportunity for learning. There's an opportunity for learning. There's also a training that takes place. How do you sift through everything that has been said to pick that which is useful? How do you understand when things are said indirectly as a do and don't? Because fundamentally, as human beings, and particularly as young people, young adults, and so on, growing up, we hate being told, don't do this. The language of don't, the language, it's so there's another way to do this, which is to teach people how to read, fundamentally, how to read character and situation, which is precisely what literary studies does so well.
And then Joyce,
yes.
Joyce, do you see the Q&A?
I do see the Q&A, yes.
Yes, there's the last question actually relates to exactly what you're saying now. Maybe you can say something about that.
What is the place of gossip in creating fiction, especially in researching controversial historical events like the coup, land wars, post-election violence, and so on? Absolutely brilliant. I mean, so two things. I had flagged Amata Aido's story because the whole structure of something to talk about on the way to a funeral is actually gossip. Two women walking, talking about the person who's going to be married. And And when I think about it as something that people would do today, because the funeral program, the one that you're actually given that has, the theology, it tells you nothing about the person who died. So listen to the talk around as you go to the funeral, really, because there's a way in which we do this, but I'm not going to get into that. Very, very interesting. From an academic point of view, and I think it was Keguro who had flagged this around academia and gossip and historians using gossip. I do know a certain book, actually, about Kenyan history, post-independence history, that is largely written from dinner table talk, the ambassador's diary entry points and stuff. Is it true because he wrote in his journal after he came from dinner? Is that what makes it? So this is interesting. But, Gloria, to your point, I think that it is absolutely important whether one is writing history as history or writing as fiction about those very events that you mentioned, to pay attention to what were people saying at the time. Because one of the reasons why we are interested in gossip is the work that gossip does. What does it allow people to do? Forget about whether it's true or not. Yeah? Forget about who said it. The question is, what does it allow people to do? And so if you're writing about, for example, the 1982 coup, what were people saying at the time? Because it teaches you something around what were their biggest fears, what were their deepest hopes, perhaps their unspoken hopes and stuff. When people were creating, and I think I talk about this in Kenya at 50, when people were creating rumors around Moi has throat cancer, of course they didn't say Moi, they had all sorts of names for him. Yep. There was one minister who, if you wanted to talk about him, you kind of winked your eye because that's how he looked. He had one smaller eye, and that's how you call it. So those stories. No, I think it's important to get into that because it tells you about people's aspirations. It tells you about the things that are important to people, which for various reasons, they may not be able to verbalize directly at the time. And the gossip becomes the channel through which they kind of articulate things that are of deep meaning to them, of deep significance, and to understand the people better. What kind of people are these? And I think that it's fascinating for a fiction writer to really think about the work of gossip, because that can drive a plot. We've seen how Ama Ata Idol uses it to drive her entire plot. It can drive not just character, it can also structure plot in fascinating ways. So the short answer to this, Gloria, is what is the work of gossip? What does gossip enable? What is it actually doing? Because that will tell you how you can use it in fiction.
Neo says something about the picture, and I remember we had spoken about it with you at some point, about when you come back from the funeral, carrying the program home becomes an important point to go and gossip about it as well.
Yes, indeed. The takeaway item from the funeral could also be a point of gossip and updates for those who didn't attend the funeral. Absolutely fascinating, and this is what Keguro started at the beginning by describing as the afterlife of gossip. Not just the person who died, but also who came and how did they mourn. What was going on there, including who was left out. There's a lot of gossip also, by the way, to be picked from the newspaper pages in the death and funeral announcements. Absolutely a lot of gossip in there.
There's a final one.
Who is left out?
The final question here, by Gasheri, I think.
That's Nyagudi.
No, from Dimam, who speaks talk about the gendered nature of harmful gossip. 437.
I can't talk about that. I would want that extrapolated a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, because I think partly it's also that one of the things that's really interesting to me is watching certain kinds of generational shifts that seem to have happened rather rapidly, so that things that were scandalous at some point, right, are not. So that what is even gossip changes, right? So you're a woman in the 1980s and you've got dreads. What's your name? You know, that one clearly takes drugs. Like it meant something. There was a gossip could attach to it in a way that it doesn't now, right? You are a man in the 1990s and you are wearing a pink shirt. I mean, you know, but you know, you reach the year 2000 and you know, you're a Kenyan man. So 2000, I'm back, and I'm seeing all these Kenyan men, and they're all wearing skinny jeans, and my brain is going, "What is happening?" Because that would have been unimaginable to me in 1985. It really would have been, right? So there's a way that even what is gossip worthy really shifts and changes, right? So to talk even what the song that Joyce had brought up earlier by some Kahiga, you know, the woman who owns an apartment, blah 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 blah, takes care of young men, so and so. That is a song that actually scans very differently now.
Yeah, yeah.
Where it's much more common to, you know, have women who are supporting men, have older women supporting younger men, right? So that the scandal of it is not quite the same, unless, you know, so there'd have to be other layers added, right? It would have to be sort of like, that is an elder in the church, and then she does that. Then, so there's a way that certain things shift across time, and the layers then sort of have to be added back in a kind of way, you know. So it's one thing for someone to do something, it's something else if that person is the head of the Bible study or the head of the PTA or the head of the Mothers Union, or the, you know, so there are particular positions that place one in a kind of vulnerability. And I'm not going to talk about like high school gossip because I have not been in high school for a very, 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 very long time. So I have no clue what counts as gossip there and what matters. I do have a vague memory. No, but you know, I went to a boys' school though, so you know, there was really nothing. Honestly, there was nothing that kind of circulated. Okay, I see we have been joined.
I'm wondering
about you. We're gossiping. Me and Nyairo are gossiping about Keguro when he was in Boston and he was on drugs.
Look at that broken telephone. Oh my goodness.
I was never in Boston, first of all, so you know, so it doesn't even count.
Did anybody here ever watch Gossip Girls? What happens when cultural productions like that? Yeah. What's your take on that as a site of gossip and as a way of, just what's your take on that?
For me?
Yes, Eddie.
I loved it, number one, as an aesthetical feature, but also the fact that they had to the use of the dependence on getting the information from the gossip girl, so that anything else rotates or everything else circulates around that text message that they get. And then the idea that everyone gets the same message almost at the same time, and then now the drama now comes up in different ways. But everyone gets the same message at the same time, and everyone keeps on waiting for it. It's like Bridgerton. If you watch Bridgerton, like you wait for lady, you wait for the lady to send you the newspaper almost at the same time, and then that is now where the drama begins.
But that drama is only possible, I think, both in Gossip Girl and in the Bridgertons, because those societies are so small, right? And what is at stake in societies that in places where things like rank matter so much, right? And there's competition. Remember, the Bridgertons is really all about rich young woman can marry the wealthiest man. I have read the books, please. I'm not like you people who just watch TV things. I read the books. You know, I read trash romance, as I say all the time. So I think those are, for me, slightly different things. And like Joyce, I'm very interested in the ordinary, in the quotidian. So in terms of how gossip works to affect major power structures and to
it must be Keguro.
Did we lose Keguro?
beyond me. Okay, let me say this. We have 6 minutes left. Do we want to start winding down? I don't know, Eddie, if you have a plan, or if Carly has a plan.
We need to be winding down, I think.
Yes.
Eddie, did you want to invite Palesa to say something? You've called her onto the screen.
Yes.
Oh, no, she was supposed to come and say thanks to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe if I could just snatch the kind of few minutes remaining to really flag a couple of key things.
Yes, please.
So one of the things we've established repeatedly is gossip is a genre that relies on storytelling and requires certain skills. The other thing we've flagged repeatedly is power. And I think it's Roosevelt Keguro has just said it very clearly, that if at all there's a gendering that happens with gossip so that it is necessarily associated with women, perhaps that has more to do with how women are perceived as gossiping, or rather, the reason we perceive women as gossiping more is precisely because they have found ways to navigate societal control. So where they do not have power to be heard, gossip then becomes an instrument. And I think that ties up very well with a kind of, bigger national architecture where we're saying that in dictatorships, whether it is Idi Amin or Daniel Moi or whichever other ridiculous clown, where people don't have access to reliable, dependable information because the actual established channels of that information, say mainstream media, are too afraid to do so, people find other ways. And that information is shared as gossip. Yeah. And perhaps when it is shared as gossip, then people escape the censure of a ruthless state, right? Yeah. It's harder to follow them up and so on. But you do remember, those of you who are my age, that in the Moi years, we had something about spreading fear and despondency. It could get you taken to the court. It was this omnibus thing. And in there could be that very gossip that we are talking about, apart from, of course, the publications now, which were, Pambana, Mwakenya, and so on. And once it is written, then it is no longer gossip or rumor. It is actually harmful, and it is called sedition. So in talking about the hierarchies of gossip, then let's also think about how the state plays a role in giving not just a grammar to certain activities that are everyday activities, but also politicizes them, turns them in, and uses legal instruments to control them. I think that's fascinating. And of course, the other thing we talked about repeatedly was how gossip is about intimacy. The kind of bodily affiliations that take place, that must take place for that to happen, and the bonds that are built are all part of this intimacy. I think for me, those are the quick things that I would flag as very rich conversation that has come out of this today. And I just at this point then want to say thank you very, very much, Eddie, for provoking us. We might have remained on Twitter, Dr. Keguro and I just subtweeting each other here, but you brought us to a formal space to actually think about cultural production that really, really matters to us, and conversations, questions that we all have in our different corners, but never have an opportunity to articulate. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Kali. Thank you to the Royal African Society and everybody else who's been here listening, and all of those who contributed really, really vibrant discussions even before the session started. Thank you.
Keguro, any last words? No, well, final words.
Keguro, as you come in with final words, do children gossip? Is a question I had.
Ah, nice.
Yes, they do. That is the only thing I'll say. But I'll also, it's just been a pleasure talking to Joyce. Just a joy, an absolute joy. I'm so thankful for that. And thankful to everyone else. And since we're going to keep time, we're not going to be Africans and just stay here until 6 p.m. saying goodbye and give me more gossip. I'll just hand back over to Eddie and Palesa. Yeah.
Eddie,
do you want Palesa to end? Palesa, no, please.
I mean, I thought you'd say something first, or you'd end it.
I can do the final amen. Yes.
Okay, cool. Palesa.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eddie, for this platform, and an opportunity to thank all of you for an amazing, juicy seminar. you know, I kept tweeting with a friend and WhatsApping with a friend throughout this entire session, and just talking about how juicy it is, just how much it sounds like gossip in and of itself. And I mean, today I've just really come to realize that, or I've had to acknowledge that I love gossip. You know, I know an instance where I was in public transport and eavesdropping over a conversation that two people that I don't know were talking about, gossiping about someone else. And before the story could end, my stop was coming up. So I just thought maybe I should just pass the stop and get off the next stop, because I just need to hear where the story is going, right? So gossip is always juicy, and I just really appreciate Dr. Joyce and Dr. Keguro for really amazing conversation that really got us thinking. Very thought-provoking in many ways. I'd also like to thank Dr. Ombagi and Dr. Kali for organizing this amazing seminar. And I look forward to many other things that will be organized through this platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Palesa. I've just gone to look for you. Are you that person who's on Twitter but with 0 tweets? A real gossip.
I had to let go of my Twitter account, but yes, that's me.
Eddie, thank you so much for bringing this idea. I was very excited when I learned about it and wrote to Eddie straight away. I can do it. I'll put it on. So thank you all so much for turning up. Thank you for a fantastic conversation. And I hope it will be continued on other platforms. And for those of you who came to attend, don't tell anyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. I can keep the room open if you want to hang out for a bit. I don't have to shut.
Yeah, please. I wanted to just have a little conversation with my friend Keguro, who I don't see as often as I should.
I'm happy.
Just catch up with what exciting things he's doing, because I know he's always writing fascinating stuff.
Are we invited? No.